Well, our kind of fourth week of doing our huge family conversation, kind of along the lines of some general information, education type stuff. And last week we had left off. We had talked about kind of meta narratives, and we had mentioned that we probably need to start to dive into some of the history of a lot of the, I guess, big, well, meta narrative type things, and how our culture, our society, and some of the main issues that are influencing our day have kind of come to fruition, how they were kind of formed and evolved and whatnot. And today, this is kind of the first part of a multi video podcast about kind of liberalism and the history of that, and kind of, again, some of the issues we're facing currently. And I guess to kind of start off, of course, you can kind of add whatever you'd like, but maybe we just kind of start with the idea of liberalism and kind of what that is, and then we can kind of dive into some of the other historical things that go into that after we kind of understand kind of what that even is in the first place.
Um, yeah, I think that's a good starting spot. I want to quickly preface with maybe why we're going there.
Sure.
And you did cover it. But I think starting with the end in mind, the end goal is to really start to dissect the rejection of liberalism and this idea that some academics, that's what I'm going to call them,
Sure.
think that we have moved past, or that we can move past, or that we should move past, whatever you want to say, is that we no longer need modernity and modern thought. And I think once you start to do that, well, I mean, the answer's in the name, but you become a postmodernist. You are an after modernism. I don't know, believer, adopter, whatever you want to call
Activist
that.
thinker, something like
Sure, it's
that.
probably activist. Yeah, that's probably right. Um, so we've talked a few times, and I've talked with some other people, but being like, why? What is it that it's revolting against? Well, or rebelling against. It's rebelling against the idea that we still live in modern thought and that we still need modernity. Okay, well, how is that applied now for us, like in, every day? And what is the actual, like the practical consequence of, adopting a narrative like postmodernism? Well, it's going to essentially mean the destruction of liberalism. That's what it's going to mean. And once you have that, I think that is the final frontier of Western civilization as it's traditionally been known. That will be the collapse. So I am sitting here thinking, and I'm no pro at this, and I'm definitely no historian,
Right.
but I'm like, what is it that led to liberalism? Why is it this framework that I think really adopt and implement in our country, and it affects all sorts of aspects, but really like in the political, the legal, and wow, no, it's more than that. It's more than political and legal. It's philosophical, it's cultural, it's social, it's all sorts of things. So I think my long way of finally getting to the point I'm trying to make is saying why the history of this is important, because it's showing how we actually came to be, showing all of the bad that previously happened for thousands of years, specifically really for hundreds of years, but for more than 1,000 years, but all the bad that came with that. And this kind of seems to be maybe not the polished result, but it's pretty close to that. Liberalism was the evolution of how people were organized in society for centuries. So anyway, that's why if we're going to start saying that it's time, not we, but if there are people that are claiming that it's time to move into postmodernism and destroy liberalism or move past it, whatever, it really is the destruction. And I'm tired of being semantic about it. But semantic meaning, playing word
Right.
games, trying
Right.
to. So,
Kind of tiptoe
um,
around it.
yeah, and arguing. Yeah, it's like arguing. Let me give you a hardcore definition. Since we're doing this, I guess I can just Google it.
Sure.
Define semantic. Relating to meaning in language or logic. Semantics is the branch of linguistics and logic concerned with meaning. So if we're arguing, I don't know, this versus that, is there actually a distinction there? Is there a relevant difference that we ought to be actually talking about? They say like deconstruction, and I'm saying destruction. Like, are we being semantic? Are we saying the same thing just with a different word? And no, I'm saying they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
But back to the point of the history is important because if you're going to make a claim like we need to move past this or destroy it, that's a lot. Let me clarify that. That's a really bold take
Sure.
because you're saying that you know better than what hundreds of years have produced into what has become the most dominant, successful, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Wealthy country that's ever existed. And you're saying that you know better than what's been produced and what's actually being executed here. That it's
You better
it's
have a good
unbelievable.
argument.
Yeah, there better be a really good argument. Yeah, there's a serious burden you have to carry in order to be correct, I think. Oh, there's a lot of rambling. But I think I'm trying to set the context of it's really important to now dig into the history of what's produced it, analyze that, why did it come to be, and then you have a starting point on how you can assess the arguments against it rather than just saying, well, let's hear the counter arguments. No,
Right.
you need to understand the first argument. So you asked, what is liberalism? Well, I think it's a story. That's kind of my generic way of answering that. It's a description of, I think, human nature, the problems humans have faced throughout history, the solutions to the problem, and the goal. And now that's not specific, but I think if you think of it as I'm using narrative in a different context, but as a
Sure.
story, an evolution of what's come to be, I think that that gives us some good insight. But to be specific, I think it's, a political or social like philosophy that promotes a few things. One, individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, and like free enterprise. So, an
Yeah.
economic state where it's very free, very hands-off government. So
Well, and if
I think,
the very first, I remember the first time you had talked about kind of the pursuit of the good life, capital G, right? And I think maybe kind of what I'm hearing you say, right, is that liberalism is kind of the pursuit of that, that you are going after something that is truly worthwhile and good, but liberalism is kind of the way that we go about doing that in a meaningful, maybe systematic way in some way is
yeah,
kind of
that's right. I think that's right. Yeah, it's the framework, it's the path, it's whatever you want. It's the applied at actually finding what the good is. Yeah, liberalism allows us to live the good life. And I think you're going to see specifically as we dive into the history, it promotes things like science.
yeah,
Science is good. It helps us not get sick. It helps us know what's true on a
right.
scientific like level, empirical way that we can prove things so we know what's true or we're trying to find what's true. It does things like allow for freedom of conscience to where you can worship whatever religion you prefer so you don't feel like you're always having this internal battle trying to repel or rebel against a government that's forcing you to do something. It does things like treat people equally. So it allows for a lot of prosperity. It allows people to pursue their own desire within a framework that everybody else can agree to. So there's a lot of freedom. That's what liberalism promotes. We'll dive into it, and I'm kind of jumping
Yeah,
around, but
yeah,
it's avoiding tyrannical reigns, REIGN, the reign of tyranny that existed for hundreds of years.
yeah,
So this really is it's an eye-opening kind of framework that I think a lot of good comes from. So there's a lot. That kind of answers your question of what it is. Now, I
yeah,
mean, I could just sit here and puke information at you. I don't think that's very helpful. But I think what is helpful is actually like diving into the history a
yeah.
little bit. I mean, this is back to I mean, world history, American history, there's all sorts of history that's involved here. Um, Quite interesting. So, are you familiar with a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
kind of start with, yeah, start wherever you want, and I'll
Start at
just
the
kind of
beginning?
interject as
Okay.
we go.
Well, I mean, let's go back several hundred years. I mean, the medieval times, the Dark Ages. It was not a good time. People were dying like crazy. They were fighting all the time. It was looking backwards, we look at them as I don't know what the right term is, but a very primitive kind of people. Think back to 1000 AD. So I don't know, what does that end up being? 1,000 years ago?
Right,
Or even go back to the 1400s before, a lot of this stuff really starts to kick. I mean, what's going on? So you have things like, I mean, you have the bubonic plague that's
yeah,
killing everyone. I mean, I think the numbers still aren't totally like aligned, but at least 75 million Europeans, well, people across Europe, Africa, and Asia have died.
right,
There's probably more than that. It might be in the hundreds of millions, closer to 200. Who knows? We have Generally, you have churches that claim to hold the knowledge, to hold the truth. That's what I should say, the truth.
right,
So people are out searching for knowledge, trying to figure out, I mean, basic questions that people are asking all the time. Who am I? What am I doing? What is my purpose? And generally, you have the church, the church that is saying, well, you need to come talk to us. We're the ones that can interpret the scripture, and that can tell you, and who essentially answer those questions, which leads us to the connection of, well, so that means that people generally believed that the truth came from the scriptures, and that's kind of it. And not to say that I necessarily disagree that the truth comes from the scriptures, but there's a number of other things that are true that aren't proven, or even discussed in the scripture. The scriptures don't talk about gravity.
right,
They don't talk about how bacteria infects you and can cause all sorts of problem, like throbbing pain, hot throbbing pain. It
right,
doesn't talk about that. It
right,
doesn't talk about, the connection between your toe and your foot and how those operate together. So I mean, there's a number of things, but people back then don't have the tools or the understanding, or I mean, it's probably even not even a conscious awareness that there are other things. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, hard to speculate. But how are we actually proving things that are true? I don't know how they were doing that. And it's hard to kind of fathom because we're like, oh, we'll just hop on the internet and figure it out because some doctors already solved that. That's not the world they lived in. So it's a dark time with a lack of knowledge and kind of an inability to acquire the knowledge unless you're part of the church. But the church has a number of problems. The church is politically involved, it's corrupt. You're able to, I mean, essentially be absolved of your sin by paying money to the priest. I realize maybe I'm not painting this in the fairest light, but that's what's going on. How so I think you have something to ask. Go
No,
ahead.
you're okay. Well, I was going to say, I think to your point though too is it was kind of, from what I understand, the kind of the medieval times and into the Renaissance was really the true, I guess, beginning of like specialization. Like most people hadn't specialized yet, just historically, in terms of that. Yeah, there were like blacksmiths and different things, but
Sure.
the truth really started to come out once people were like, nope, I am now, if you will, kind of an expert in some things, and I can teach it, but there's surplus of like food and water and the lack of sickness, which comes later, all of those things. And I think that contributes a lot to the point you're trying to say, where there wasn't a lot of these things, but also I think it's because there was no specialization. Nobody took the time and didn't really have the time to sit and think about anything because their basic needs weren't even met with the circumstances of their era,
Sure.
of the
Yeah.
history.
Yep. They were struggling to find food.
Right.
I mean, they're growing their own crops, and man, a bad winter wipes your food out. Like that's not good. So yeah, yes, I think that's probably, a significant part of it is there wasn't much opportunity to even really dive in because there wasn't enough um, prosperity to go around to really kind of to buffer or cushion, having that kind of opportunity. But the counter to that is, but then you get into the 1600s and you start having people, I mean, like Galileo, that's starting to really theorize some of the science, develops the telescope. You get, I mean, Newton that comes up with some basic, really critical laws of science like
Right.
gravity. You get Francis Bacon that is starting to develop like empirical inquiry and empiricism, which is critical.
Right.
So yeah, part of it, I think you're right. They didn't have the opportunity because they were too busy tending to other needs. But they also, I mean, this really was a discovery. It's not
Yeah.
like it's hard to discover something you're consciously aware of. It's not a discovery at that point, right? It's like a
Right.
coming to terms with, or like I don't even know if it's an awakening, but you naturally come into it, right? I don't discover where I left my keys because I'm consciously aware of my keys. I know they're somewhere, but I'm not discovering that. So
Right.
maybe I'm making a point that's a little bit different than yours, but this to kind of get us back on track. You're
Yeah.
right. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the scientific revolution are the critical, I think, like milestones that really took us out of the dark or the medieval times and into this, I don't know what to call it, modern time. I think that's a good way, or this enlightened time. So I think that that is critical. But there's another piece of this. The Reformation of the church is also pretty important because I think that really starts to shape. I'll start with the Reformation. And
And by
there's a lot of overlap.
Reformation, sorry, by Reformation, you're specifically referring to the Catholic Church. I don't think we've explicitly said
Yes,
that,
yes,
right? You're
yes,
saying the
yes.
Catholic Church.
And
Okay.
Martin Luther,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, I'll spare you the long spiel about that, but I mean, you're familiar. Martin Luther decides that he writes his 95 Theses because he's got all sorts of problems with the Catholic Church. Publishes it, about the church abuses, and all of a sudden, I mean, this that really did cause like a radical reorganization of, I mean, of the church, the split of the church, and that turned into a number of wars. I mean,
Yeah.
it turned into religious war, the Crusades. That's what came out of that. So that was very interesting because right then, or what I think kind of happens is you have people realizing that this not all truth is discovered through the scripture and through the church. And there's a number of things that we haven't discovered yet. So I think that I hesitate to say that there's like some subjectivity that's pushed into that because I think it can still be objective, but it changes the perspective because people are now aware and recognizing that not everything, even morality, may not even come from the scripture. So I think that starts to, again, a radical shift. And maybe I'm oversimplifying, but I think that really set in motion a number of things. So this also, I mean, it coincides with the Renaissance, which everybody's kind of familiar with.
Right.
Um, but really, maybe it's not the Reformation. It's hard to really break these up like into time periods because there is some overlap.
Yeah.
I know that you really can't identify them throughout history into like separate time periods, but there's a lot of similar idea that's going on. We're moving away from something. We're starting to shift our perspective into something. We're broadening and we're discovering new things. So the Renaissance, we kind of talked about a lot of this stuff, but that goes back even further. I think that's like 1430s, 1430s. That
Sure.
sound right? Somewhere in there. Constantinople falls, right? Like the big capital of Rome, and people scatter, and they take a lot of those early manuscripts from key philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, etc., and they start to really dig into this and really discover what's going on. And another piece of that too is that they're starting to review some of the history. I read a couple of these. You have the historians, the Thucydides, Herodotus, um, Plutarch. Yeah, those are There's a lot that's going on. People are rediscovering these, not ancient, maybe ancient, I don't know, these
Sure.
older philosophical manuscripts and starting to adopt a different viewpoint than what the church has been pushing the whole time. The church meaning the Catholic Church. Thanks for
Right.
clarifying that. So this is shifting ethics. It's shifting virtue. It's shifting like what is good, what ought to be pursued. People are starting to think about these things a little bit differently. It's no longer like a divine ordering of what you ought to do. There's a sense of self-discovery that can go on with figuring out what the truth is, rather than going to your priest and asking him to interpret scripture that may or may not be true that you don't have access to. It's really an awakening. That's what's going on with the people. So oh, that's a lot, and I'm
Well,
talking fast.
and back to kind of, I guess I'm referencing our kind of our first podcast a little bit. We had talked a little bit in there about critical thinking, and that's the theme that I keep being drawn to is that prior to the Renaissance, people weren't really allowed to think for themselves a lot because of access to, I guess, the reference points that a lot of the church leaders and monarchs and different people had is that these people were educated and can read and write and all those things. The common people couldn't, but not only that is they weren't allowed or even taught to think for themselves. It was just you do what we say because God will bless you if you do, and if you don't, you're damned or you're in
Hellfire
trouble
and
or God's
damnation.
gonna
Yep.
whatever it is, right? And then these things start to come out. Martin Luther and whatnot, not King, Martin Luther,
You're good.
and is kind of one of the many that does this. And in his first act of, I guess, rebellion against the church, one of the kind of primary acts, if you will. But then other, no, I guess, common people were then started to realize, oh, maybe I should start asking questions even, and just starting that with that, like I should ask the questions and the details and try to understand for myself, and I should probably learn how to read and write, which hadn't been common at all in history up until that point. Even the Romans and Greeks, it wasn't common to read and write unless you were, um, what's the term, like aristocrat, something like, I
Unless
don't
you're
know.
an aristocrat. Yeah.
Yeah, like that just wasn't something that's been common throughout history up until less than 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's right. A lot of these people aren't educated. And if you're not educated, what do? You turn to the people that claim to have the authority, and then you hope that they're right and you trust in them. So yeah, people start to wake up. Things get a little bit better. No one's, well, we don't have hundreds of millions of people dying from the plague.
Right,
So the other piece of this is, I mean, we start to get, I mean, this is the beginning of the scientific revolution. I mean, medicine's starting to come out. People, it's just not as dark and dreary and horrible and nasty of a life that people were living. We get into the 1700s. I mean, medicine's starting to evolve a little bit. Or excuse me, science is evolving a little bit, and medicine starts to eventually evolve out of that. So empiricism. So, like actually being able to do empirical inquiry and look at the numbers. That's critical because now it's no longer just kind of a qualitative, anecdotal, here's what I say the truth is. It's we can prove it.
right.
And we ought to more closely align with that because we've tested it over and over. I mean, that the scientific, like I don't even remember what the term's called, but I mean, the
Scientific
scientific
method.
method.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So that starts to come out. So I mean, it's not just in, one area. This is all over physics, it's medicine, it's biology, it's all sorts of things. So
Well, and even
um
in, if I may, like even business, right? Things start to actually get
yeah,
recorded and tracked and
yeah,
not necessarily banks, but people,
right.
governments are really taking form outside of, or they're starting to evolve from just a monarchy, tyrannical type system to more people being like, well, maybe this isn't the best way to do things, and I need to start governing my own means and wealth myself instead of just, you know,
There you go.
allowing it to go to the king or whoever it is that's in charge, whoever, if you will, the regional ruler is. me being accountable for that.
Yep. I think that's one of the big takeaways that comes from this is we start to focus on the individual rather than groups at this point. It's no longer, I belong to a certain class, and so I am that class. I'm an individual. Eventually skipping ahead, it turns into I have rights as an individual. I have, because I'm a human being, I have, it's said I have certain entitlements that I can take advantage of simply because I'm an individual being. So I think as we start to, this really has been a little bit scattered, but I
Yeah.
think that the context and the conversation is helpful. But the big thing that start to evolve out of this, I think you hit on that one, and you started hitting on reason. You're using critical thinking. In order to critically think, you have to be a reason in being. So I think reason comes out of that, and then we have empirical science, and then progress. I think then that's kind of a vague term, but it's no longer as bad as it was. Things are getting better. People are living longer, fighting a little bit less. It's progressing a little bit. So um, then shifting gears. I mean, really, the Enlightenment I think is a little bit different. It's kind of the same though, because this is like, what do they call it? Like the new age of reason or something.
Yeah.
Um, it's like a cultural transformation that changed kind of how people see everything. So, um, yeah, some of the time, I mean, I've got a little bit of a timeline. It's kind of helpful, kind of not, but it's not just all of Europe happening at once. Well, maybe it helps to maybe talk about what it is, the Enlightenment. It's an intellectual movement. I think the way I would describe it is it's an intellectual movement that really started to emphasize kind of what we just talked about: reason, empirical science, progress, individual rights. And we start to see countries, it really taking root in countries in Europe and Western Europe. So it starts with like England, um, the Netherlands, France. It really takes root. Um, and then it spreads a little bit further out, and eventually it hits, Germany and the United States. Germany is a whole different problem that we're going to leave aside for now. But um,
Well,
essentially, it's philosophy. Go ahead.
no, but I was going to say the time you have, kind of the timeline that you would kind of put, I mean, England, I think, is kind of the start because that's when we really started to see people leaving England. I mean, we had
Yeah,
explorers leave Western Europe and come to the Americas prior to that, but that's really when you started to see some of these, the grandparents, if you will, of our founding fathers
yeah,
leave England, say, I don't really want to keep following the king who's taxing us and making us abide by what was it, the Church of England, something like that.
yeah,
And they're like, we're just going to get out of here and let's go kind of start over a little bit because that'll at least give us some space where they can't govern us so rigidly in that. And then it kind of, I mean, it spread because of course France then kind of had something similar. A lot of people started coming this way from
yeah,
France, and in Spain was also,
yep,
I mean, very similar. That the conquistadors were earlier than that, but a lot of Spaniards started coming over and colonizing
yep,
Mexico and northern South America. And so yes, I mean, I think you could see the migration of people, the immigration, I guess, of leaving their countries to look for something new is already something that we you didn't really see in history very much anyway. Like it wasn't common for people to say, I'm gonna leave and go colonize somewhere different because that
yeah,
just never happened and
yeah,
never has happened up until that point.
yep, yeah. I think that's right. Um,
I kind
no,
of cut you off
it's
from your
it's fine. I'm trying to. So let me think. So the Enlightenment, yes, no, I'm glad you made that point. I think that's true. You're starting to see a spread. It wasn't just isolated. It started in England, it spread quickly, and all of a
yeah.
sudden Western Europe is doing all sorts of things. So I'm trying to really like if I could put my finger on like what the Enlightenment did. It's this philosophical move, like but it's more than that, but it's like a philosophical movement that's really trying to get after something specific, and it's something like improving human society and its understanding of the world, and the way that it does that or what becomes of that is, we use reason and science and empirical data that really tries to help us structure that. It's a way that we can make the most good for everybody. So I think, and it's way more complex than that.
Yeah,
But you start to see, I mean, there's a list of philosophers that are involved. I've read all of these. Maybe you've read a few, but I mean, Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, Hume, Adam Smith, Immanuel Kant. I mean, they have a number of things that they're writing about that have different impacts. I mean, there are a number of impacts that every single one of them have had on the formation, well, on the founding fathers. And that really is kind of what we're the big connection is. These people heavily influenced our founding fathers.
yeah,
So our founding fathers took those theories, those principles, that literature, and they create a constitution. They set up a society that's really based on those principles. And what it led to is the most successful country that's ever existed in the history of the world. That's what it is. And I'm not taking arguments on
yeah,
that, right? Like that's just a fact. And so this bringing it back full circle, I mean, that was a crash course on what that is. But what that led to was the formation of where we are.
yeah,
And so liberalism really is the backbone, and the foundation of liberalism is all of the stuff that we've talked about. So if we are going to move past that, we are going to essentially say that what has been produced, the best thing that's ever been produced in terms of a state or a country, is no longer necessary, or that we have just evolved past it. And like you said, that's a really big claim, and you better have some serious evidence to prove it. And you have the burden to carry, you have to prove that up. So, and I don't think they can. To preview of coming attractions, I
right.
don't think they can.
Sure.
So, and I think it's not close too. So, I think this kind of history, and again, I sometimes I get a little nervous doing this stuff because I'm like, I'm no historian.
Sure.
I am not. This is not my profession, but I've read every single one of those ones that we've talked about, and I think I have a pretty good understanding of it. So, my general recommendation is go read that stuff. If you disagree with me, be my guest. Go read everything that we just talked about and come up with your own conclusion. So, um, anyway,
No,
that's kind of
I think that's kind of a good place to kind of, I mean, start to put a close on it for today is
uh,
you tying it back to to our video a few weeks ago about, I guess, kind of some habits we should be developing in order to understand it. I mean, James Monroe, who, I mean, let's be real, he was kind of the architect of the Constitution, the United States Constitution. I mean, I remember reading about him a little bit and studying him a little bit, where he would spend 16 to 18 hours a day reading these very people that you've listed. I mean, he at one point, I think he quit his job and basically lost his family fortune so that he could get books, so that he could study, so that he could be prepared for when the time came that some of the other, I guess, political leaders at the time of the newly forming, 13 states, he could go in kind of, here's the structure, here's the format, here's how it's all going to work, and now everybody just has to kind of approve it. But he didn't.
yep,
He put so much work into understanding I mean, all of this stuff, the history of it all, and picking out the best pieces of all of it and saying, let's tie it all together. And that's how, I mean, I'll be honest, I think that's how they were able to create something so brilliant and magnificent as our country is. Because and I think a lot of them and a lot of, as I've read other historians who are, experts on the subject, most of them say most of these guys were not experts even themselves. They just wanted the best thing for their countries, and the few that were, they got educated, they did the simple little things, and I mean the if you will, the work of the few benefited everybody, right? And so I think to your point, yeah, we're not experts, but we're kind of just picking the main points of brilliant people that have come before us and kind of trying to create some sort of context. And it's you really more than me. I can't even take any other credit for it. You're the one who did all the work, but um, trying to create some more, well, a better framework for the arguments we're trying to make against maybe some of the things that are going on currently. But the history is foundational to even to before that subject, as you kind of said about meta narratives, right? I even made a point that was within a meta narrative, and you said, nope, you got to take it back up a level. You got to go back to the main argument. You got to go back to the point. And history, I think, is, to your point, is the foundation of it all.
It's the precursor to the meta narrative, huh?
Yes,
So yeah, I think
that's right.
I'm trying to heed my own advice and be like, let's continue to peel back layers. And I think the history is the bedrock. And if you or anybody else is like, no, I think we need to check this other thing, I'm happy to look at it because I
Sure.
am continually going to try to peel back layers on the analysis. So, um, yeah, I agree with yes, everything that you said. And you know what's funny is I was talking with someone else this week, and I was like, hold on, before we can even have this conversation, we have to establish what the framework is that we're operating in. And the person was like, well, I don't understand what any of this is you're talking about. And I'm like, okay, fair. I appreciate the honesty, but I'm not going to be having a discussion if we're not operating by the same rules within the same framework because we're just going to be talking past each other the whole time. So I
Right.
think history is hopefully where we can get to a point that, people, even if we have minor disagreements, we can be like, yeah, okay, we can talk about the history and understand where we got here. As long as there's an appreciation of the end result based on the historical, kind of unfolding that led us there, I think there's an opportunity to have effective discussion and even, I mean, debate important things
Yeah.
because we're operating within the same realm. So if you're not, what's the point? And at that point, if you're like, well, what's the point? Why even talk? Then why don't we just let it descend into chaos and just go back into tyranny? And I'm exaggerating, but
Right.
why don't we just have someone to make all the decisions for us? So I think there's a lot of value in being able to do I mean, walking through the history. I know you wanted to wrap up, so I'll shut up.
No, I think this is great. I mean, I guess there's a lot more history to go into. I mean, geez, holy smokes, we could take how much time on just kind of the American
A
Revolution. I
few
mean, that's
books.
right.
Yeah.
Geez Louise. But yeah, I guess kind of the last point maybe I'll ask is what should people do coming out of it? What's the invite? I mean, history, we talked about the history, but what do people need to do now to go and better understand it and get on the same page as maybe you and I are thinking or the same line of thought?
Well, there's a few things, and so this is going to be off the cuff because I didn't think about this
Yeah.
before coming into this. You should go read those people. Go read John Locke. Go read the Second Treatise on Government. Go read Montesquieu and the Spirit of the Law. Go read Voltaire. Go read Rousseau. Go read David Hume. Go read Adam Smith. Go read Immanuel Kant. Kant comes a little bit later. I think he wasn't in the 17. I think he was the 1800s. Could be wrong on the day. I'm gonna have to check that. But go read that stuff, and then along with that, geez, I had something else. Um, Not only read that stuff, the influence. Oh, go read the Federalist Papers. Go read what the founding fathers were actually saying. I mean, it's hard to sort through. I mean, read. Yeah, yes, you. I think you nailed it. What does James Monroe say? Go read James Madison. Go read Thomas Jefferson. Go read and any number of them. See what they actually were talking about, because that is the best way, I think, to try to get a peek into their mind on what they thought was important. So that's that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure law school is full of all that stuff,
Oh,
but
geez. Well, I mean, yeah, and even you can just Google it. You can just,
sure.
what's Federalist Paper number
Yeah.
51? I mean, just go read through them and establish a timeline. I think sometimes I mean, it's hard reading, it's old writing, but plug that into, I mean, try to read it yourself, plug it into Chat GPT and be like, tell me what this stuff means. Read a secondary source that explains it. If you actually want to know the history, which is what you and I are trying to do, you actually
Right.
have to read the history.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's freaking hard, actually. It takes a lot of time.
Right.
So we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for next week. I'm excited to continue kind of the discussion about the history. I love the history. I think it's not only the bedrock, as you said, for kind of how we got to where we are, but it's a good reference point for maybe what's going to help us get back on track. Maybe if we're starting to see some of the things, if we disagree with some of the movements and whatnot going on currently, what are some of the key things that these guys were thinking about and doing that helped them, start to adjust and change their behaviors and thinking and mindset and philosophy and all of that, the meta narrative as a whole, so that they could then build something great out of it. And maybe we just need to get realigned. I think that's kind of what it is that we're saying is just we're not so far off the path we need to destroy it and start again. Like those guys had nothing to go off of outside of, well, they had no example, right? Where we just maybe there's just some small things that we can start to do now and hopefully create lasting
Yeah.
long-term change in whatnot.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Yeah, because if we don't establish what the meta narrative is, then we're certainly going to be
Yeah,
having a problem, and no, I mean, there's going to be an ideological fight over that. I mean, that's what we're going through. But second, if we go back to where we were aligned, I think that's helpful because now, one, we're playing by the same rules, and two, we can actually see that we can agree on a number of things, and we can really start to parse out and specifically identify what the issues are. And if we can start to have an informed dialogue about that again, or maybe for the first time, then I think that could do some good. I think but the issue that I see is we're having a lot of downstream
yeah,
issues through here rather than going back to here and being like, what does up here actually prescribe that we should be doing over here or down here? So yeah, I'm agreeing with your point, saying it a little bit differently.
yeah. No, I think that's great. Well, I'm excited to have, go into it further next week. I think this was great. Thanks for doing it.
Yep.